Hey everyone, welcome to this explainer. Today we are embarking on a really fascinating journey to decode the everyday mysteries of your own mind. We're going to be looking at consciousness, which is essentially the primary canvas of human experience. At its core, consciousness is the combination of your subjective experience of the external world and your internal mental activity. It's that fluid, ever-shifting interface between the raw, biological activity sparking inside your head and the psychological reality you actually feel and live through every single second.
So, let's dive right into this incredibly profound question. How exactly does raw neurological tissue, basically just meat and electricity, generate the rich canvas of your inner world? How do we get from objective biology to subjective feelings, complex thoughts, and vivid memories? This is the central mystery we are going to unravel today.
Here is our roadmap. First, constructing your conscious mind. Then, attention, the gatekeeper. Third, when consciousness degrades. Fourth, the architecture of sleep. Fifth, dreaming and sleep deprivation. And finally, the chemistry of altered states.
All right, Section 1. Constructing your conscious mind, building the baseline.
To really understand altered states, we first have to understand what our normal, baseline waking state actually is. Early attempts to study the mind relied heavily on introspection, basically just asking people to describe their inner feelings. But that has a fatal flaw. It's entirely subjective. Everyone's perspective is clouded by their own personal emotions and biases. For centuries, philosophers also championed dualism, the idea from thinkers like Descartes, who argued that your physical body and your conscious mind were two completely separate entities. But to build a robust, empirical science of the mind, modern cognitive science demands objective truth. Today, the entire field relies on contemporary materialism. This is the scientific consensus that the mind and the brain are completely inseparable.
Under this materialist view, the specific structural networks in the neurochemistry in your brain directly construct your thoughts, your emotions, and your subjective experiences. Simply put, the mind is just what the brain does. Any change to the physical structure or the chemical balance up there leads to a direct, measurable change in your conscious reality. It's a strict one-to-one biological relationship.
Moving on to Section 2. Attention, the gatekeeper, filtering reality. Think about it. The physical world floods your brain with an infinite amount of sensory input every single second. It's overwhelming, so your brain needs a ruthless filter. That's attention, and it splits into two very distinct tracks. First is automatic processing. This is super fast, totally unconscious, and takes very little mental energy, kind of like an experienced driver cruising down a clear, familiar road. Second is controlled processing. This one is deliberate, slow, and demands massive mental resources, like driving that exact same car through a blinding snowstorm. This is why trying to multitask like texting while driving is so dangerous. You're forcing your brain to stretch its limited controlled processing across far too many tasks, which heavily compromises your awareness.
And when our controlled processing gets fiercely locked onto one specific task, we experience something called inattentional blindness. We can literally become functionally blind to massive changes happening right in front of our eyes. Researchers actually proved this in a famous experiment, where a person asking a stranger for directions was secretly swapped out behind a passing door for an entirely different person. Astonishingly, half the participants never even noticed they were suddenly talking to a completely different human being. We literally fail to see what we are not attending to. Wild, right?
Okay, Section 3. When consciousness degrades, disruption and trauma.
So what happens when this delicate physical architecture sustains severe damage? When an external physical force damages the brain, a traumatic brain injury, or TBI, it can cascade into clinical unresponsiveness. This takes a few forms. A coma, for instance, is a state of profound unresponsiveness. A person might actually exhibit sleep and wake cycles, like opening their eyes, but they have absolutely zero awareness. Then there's the minimally conscious state, which is deeply unsettling. Neuroimaging shows that internal mental activity and even language comprehension are still happening, but the person is trapped. They are entirely unable to command their motor systems to respond to the outside world.
That brings us to Section 4. The architecture of sleep, the active night.
For a long time, people thought sleep was just the brain powering down for the night. We now know that's completely false. Your sleep cycle, or circadian rhythm, is driven by a brilliantly precise biological mechanism. It starts when your eyes catch changes in ambient light. That signal travels straight to the suprachiasmatic nucleus located right inside your hypothalamus. This tiny structure acts as your master clock. It commands the pineal gland to either suppress sleep-inducing melatonin in the bright morning light or release it directly into your bloodstream as darkness falls.
Far from a passive shutdown, sleep is a highly dynamic cycle of distinct stages, and each stage is characterized by unique electrical signatures called EEG waveforms. Throughout a typical 90 to 110-minute cycle, your brain is actually doing some incredible physiological and psychological heavy lifting.
If you track it, you notice this distinct downward cycle. When you're active and alert, your brain fires off rapid beta waves. As you relax, it smooths out into alpha waves. Drift to sleep, and you hit light theta waves in stages N1 and N2. Finally, you plunge into stage N3, the deep, restorative delta waves where your heart rate drops, your breathing slows, and your body actively repairs itself. But then, something truly paradoxical happens. Instead of waking up, the brain spikes all the way back up into high-frequency beta waves during REM sleep. Your voluntary muscles become temporarily paralyzed, but your brain, it becomes just as active as when you are fully awake.
Let's look closer at that in Section 5, Dreaming and Sleep Deprivation, Myths and Facts.
Now let's talk about this bizarre beta wave state, the dream world. Get ready for this astonishing fact. The average human will spend roughly 6 entire years of their lifespan navigating these internally generated realities. That is a massive chunk of your life spent completely disconnected from objective physical reality.
So, naturally, how do we interpret these dreams? Well, Sigmund Freud pushed the psychoanalytic theory, claiming dreams were packed with hidden, unconscious conflicts and symbolic imagery. But modern neuroscience has largely abandoned that idea. Instead, we use the activation synthesis theory. During REM sleep, the brainstem fires off random, chaotic electrical signals. The cerebral cortex simply tries to make sense of this raw biology by synthesizing it with your stored memories, forcing it all into a narrative. And because your prefrontal cortex, the logic center of the brain, is powered down, you accept the bizarre, nonsensical dream is totally real while it's happening.
Ignoring your biological need for this process is incredibly dangerous. Short-term sleep deprivation leads to microsleeps, these brief, uncontrollable lapses into sleep that are notorious for causing fatal driving accidents. Long-term deprivation actually suppresses the hippocampus, essentially destroying your ability to consolidate new episodic memories, and it totally wrecks your metabolic regulation. In fact, if you intentionally deprive your brain of REM sleep, it will forcefully induce REM rebound the next time you close your eyes. It will rapidly bypass the deep restorative sleep stages just to force you back into a dreaming state to survive.
Finally, Section 6, Chemistry of Altered States, Rewriting the Matrix.
We can also deliberately shift our consciousness from the outside. Psychoactive substances actually cross the blood-brain barrier to fundamentally rewrite our neurochemistry, altering our neurotransmitters to change our mind. Alcohol, for instance, is a depressant that amplifies GABA, your brain's inhibitory brake, specifically disrupting the cerebellum, which is exactly why it causes slurred speech and a loss of physical balance. Caffeine is a stimulant that actively blocks your natural melatonin reception while promoting adrenaline, forcing the body into hypervigilance. Nicotine forces a massive release of reward chemicals, but your brain adapts incredibly quickly, dropping its natural baseline and locking you into a vicious withdrawal loop. And marijuana directly binds to cannabinoid receptors that suppress the hippocampus, immediately disrupting your short-term memory formation.
As we wrap up this explainer, we see a really clear biological thread. From the attention filters that block out the noise, to the circadian rhythms running our nights, right down to the neurotransmitters hijacked by a simple cup of coffee, our subjective mind is completely undeniably tethered to our objective biology. So I want to leave you with this thought to consider. Just how fragile is the biological baseline that creates the reality you trust every single day? When a lack of sleep or a single chemical can entirely rewrite your perception, who is really in the driver's seat of your consciousness? Think about it. Thanks for learning with me today, and keep exploring the fascinating mind you live inside.